So again, this is also from grade 10, and we'll just review it before we get into this chapter. Domain and range. Domain is all the possible x coordinates. It's set 1, whatever comes first. Range is all elements in set 2. So this is the y coordinate if you have x and y coordinates, and domain is the x. Domain is across the horizontal. Range is the vertical, going up in the sky. So if we have all these points, the domain is the x coordinates. So that's 4, 7. I don't need to repeat the 7 and 8. Always put them smallest to biggest. Now the range is the y coordinates. So we've got 3, 2, 5, 11. They're all different, but the smallest one is the 2, 3. So the range is 2, 3, 5, 11. The domain is 4, 7, 8. Set 1, set 2. So one thing I want to point out, if we have ordered pairs, the domain and range are just listed with commas. There's nothing connecting them, there's no graph, so the domain is just these 3 points, the range is 4. If we turn the page, we have a graph. And in this case, it's continuous. It's all points in between these two. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from the smallest, which is 1, to the biggest, which is 5. And I always leave a fair amount of space in between them, smallest to biggest. Now, we're doing horizontal. Horizontal is the x coordinate. And we want everything bigger than 1, but smaller than 5. So everything from 1 to 5, x is in between those two boundary points. And the last thing we have to do, the black dot, we need to have an equal sign. It goes to 1 and includes 1. Black dots have an equal sign, so we put half an equal sign with the less than. If it's an empty or a white dot, we do not put that. It does not include the final point. So the range is going up in the air. It's the y coordinate. So the lowest point is 1, and it goes up to 3. So 1 to 3. Oops. Now it's vertical, so we're going to put y in the middle. Y is between 1 and 3, and it's from 1 to 3. The mouth always faces the bigger number. So if you do small on the left, big on the right, they will always face that way. And the final part, the black dots, means we have an equal sign, or half an equal sign on each one. Okay, 3 graphs that we'll see later on. We have a quadratic graph. It has a curve and it stops. And we can see it stops at 5 on the graph. The domain, even though there's no arrows, if it goes to the edge of the graph, they go forever. So we're going to have the domain going forever in both directions. So we just write all real numbers. The shortcut is the R with the extra line in the middle. That's the symbol for all real numbers. All fractions, all decimals, all radicals, everything. Now the range, we can see that it stops. It stops at 5, but everything above it. So we're going from 5 to infinity. The y is in the middle, and it always faces the bigger number. Now, this one, even though there's no dot, you just assume it's a black dot if it curves, touches, and goes back up. So an equal sign. And infinity, we never reach infinity because there's always more to go. So with infinity, we never put an equal sign. Another way you can write this is y is greater or equal to 5. Both of these are correct. This one is very similar to this one, so it makes it easier just to set it up, but you can also do that. This one here. So the arrows, we've got arrows, it's going forever in both directions, this way and this way. It looks like it's pretty much going down, but it will continue forever. All real numbers. The range, forever up, forever down, all real numbers. You may even want to do negative infinity. Both work. So it's going from negative infinity to positive infinity. A shorthand way of saying that, all real numbers. And the final one, we have a graph that starts at 2 and it's curving this way. These are just for help. They're saying that we're going from here all the way up, from here forever that way. So the domain is the x coordinates. So we're at 2. 2 is the biggest, and the smallest is negative infinity. There's a black dot. Infinity never gets a black dot. The range, it starts at 0, goes forever up. 0 to infinity, we have a black dot at the bottom. No equal sign for the infinity. So now, what happens if we have an equation, a function, and we're asked to find domain and range? Now, normally with most functions, the domain and range is all real numbers. We can go as far as we want. There's 2 exceptions, and it's right here. We can't take the square root of a negative, and we can't divide by 0. So, if we look at the first one, state the domain for the following. And for both of these, we're looking for things that can't go into it. Now, there's no square root sign, so we're good there. We just can't have a 0 on bottom. So x minus 3 cannot be 0. So if I do algebra, I add 3. X cannot be 3. The domain is all real numbers except x cannot be 3. So I'm just going to write that in. Domain is all real numbers, x cannot be 3. This one here. We don't have a square root sign, so we're looking at the bottom, and there's 2 things. And anytime there's 2, and hopefully you remember this from last year, both of them count. So 5x cannot be 0, x plus 9 cannot be 0. So if I divide both sides by 5, 0 divided by 5 is still 0. So even if there's a number in front, x cannot be 0. This one, subtract 9. X cannot be negative 9. And if you want to test this, we plug this in. Negative 9 plus 9 is 0. 0 times whatever this is still 0. So the domain is all real numbers. X cannot be 0 or negative 9. Moving to C, now we have a square root sign. We know this cannot be negative. So x minus 7 must be 0 or larger. It must be positive. Now, algebra again, we add 7 to both sides. X must be greater than 7. Anything smaller will get a negative square root. It does not work, not possible. This one, another square root sign. So I'm just going to write 5x minus 8 must be greater than 0. Do my algebra, and then divide by 5. This time we get a fraction because there was a coefficient in front. We just says x must be greater than or equal to 8/5. That's the domain. So if you have a graph, you can just look at it, write down the domain and range. If you have an equation, remember these 2 rules. No negative square roots or inside the square root, and we cannot divide by 0.